Hi everyone, welcome back. Today's palette review is going to be on the ColourPop Chasing Rainbows palette. This will include 5 looks, swatches, and my thoughts on the shadows. The Chasing Rainbows palette came out for ColourPop's Holiday 2018 collection, and I initially put off buying it mostly because shipping ColourPop up to Canada can be a bit of a hassle. A lot of people report that they get customs on almost all of their shipments, and if you're a Canadian buying stuff from the US, getting dinged with customs can be expensive because not only do they charge you a tax rate, but they also charge you, I think it's $12.99 or $11.99 just for opening the package in order to figure out how much they need to charge you. So any cost that you incur is exponentially higher than you ever expect. One thing to keep in mind if you're shipping things up to Canada is that any packages that are $20 and less do not incur any charges. So this palette is 20 bucks, and I picked it up when ColourPop had a free international shipping deal. So I knew I wasn't gonna get charges on it because it was $20 and under. All right, moving on to the actual palette we're gonna be discussing today. The Chasing Rainbows palette is made out of cardboard, but it comes with a plastic sleeve on top of it that just pulls off, and I'm gonna discard that because there's no additional information on that outer sleeve. The palette is cardboard with a magnetic lid, but there is no mirror on the inside. ColourPop is incredibly inexpensive in the sense that this is only a $20 palette, so I can understand why there is no actual mirroring here. For your $20 American, you're going to be getting 15 eyeshadows that are each 1.05 grams of product, which I'm starting to realize is actually standard. I used to think 1.5 grams of product was normal because that's what MAC eyeshadows were, but more and more brands are starting to hover around the 1 gram mark, so I think I have to readjust how I think of like a full-size eyeshadow. But considering this is 20 bucks and you're getting 1 gram each, I think that's really good. What's very nice about the inside of this palette is the fact that all the names are printed on the inside. I think that is so freaking handy, especially considering it's an inexpensive brand. I feel like even higher end brands sometimes miss the mark by not printing the shade name inside the palette, and that really irks me. They also have the printing of the shade names on the back, but that's kind of irrelevant because it's not really useful if you've got them on the inside. The back of the packaging also indicates that this is made in the USA, which was a total shock for me. I think I just assumed because of the low price point that everything was made in China. I've been very inexperienced with ColourPop since their initial launch. I bought some of the Super Shock shadows and I just didn't love the formula, so I put off buying any of their palettes. So this is kind of like a re-intro to ColourPop for me, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that everything was made in the USA. I have mentioned before that I really like cardboard palettes and I like how sleek this is, so in terms of packaging, this is pretty much one of the most ideal palettes for me. The only thing it's missing out on is a mirror, but again, I don't always use a palette mirror, so this is really compact and nice, and I like how they've designed this. I'll slide in some swatches now so you can see exactly how these shadows look like swatched out on my arm. Alright, now that you've seen the swatches, let's talk a little bit about the shadows in depth. There are 15 shades in here, so I feel like you're getting a lot of variety, which is very handy for creating multiple eye looks. I don't really like when a palette is too limited overall because I feel like it kind of pigeonholes me into one look. Quads can be fun, 6-pan palettes can be fun, but I do prefer something that has between 12 to 15 shadows. Now, this is billed as a rainbow palette, and that's initially what I thought of it, but somebody pointed out, I think it was on Instagram, that it's actually missing a green, and it is. I didn't pick up on that initially, and this shade down here does look like it's reflecting a little bit of green, but it doesn't come across as green on the eyes. It's also missing an actual red, although I think a lot of people would substitute the pink and probably prefer the pink in place of a red. But in terms of like a rainbow spectrum, I still feel like this encompasses that because it's a bit of a different take on a rainbow. One thing to point out is that there's a lot of colorful shadows in here, but there are 2 browns, and I feel like those 2 kind of stick out a little bit, and they're the ones up here. That's Feeling It and Realness. And honestly, I don't think I use them. I might have grabbed Feeling It one time to sort of blend something out, but I didn't feel like they were especially necessary in such a colorful palette. I think the whole scheme is quite appealing on the eye and fun to look at, but in practice, I don't feel like those browns are actually very necessary. However, if you're somebody that doesn't use a lot of color all the time, I can see how the browns would sort of make you feel a little bit more comfortable with this palette, because the top row here is sort of a layer that I think a lot of people are comfortable wearing, and even some of the pinks down here. So maybe you feel quite comfortable using this palette because there's some neutrals in there that you can use, but there's also some color that you can also incorporate. Somebody like me doesn't need those browns in there, so I didn't really reach for them, but that's obviously a personal preference. In terms of the formula in this palette, you're actually getting a ton of mattes, which is so nice. I love more mattes in my palettes than shimmers. So there are 9 mattes and there are 6 shimmers. Now, there are 2 matte shadows that have a little bit of sparkle in them. You know the formula. It's a matte shadow basically with a little bit of glitter thrown into the mix, but it never actually sticks on the lid. I don't really know why brands do it. I mean, it's visually appealing in the pan, but in practice, you're not getting any of that glitter actually on your lid. So it seems a little bit weird to bother putting it in the formula. Those 2 shades are Manifest It and Feeling It. And again, I don't notice it on my lid, so I would basically consider those ones mattes. I found the mattes to be smooth and blendable. They only stick a little bit in a concentrated area if you use too dense of a brush. So if you're putting something in your crease and you don't want it to stick right away because you want to blend it out, use something a little bit fluffier. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because today when I was making this eye look, I grabbed a different brush than I normally use in my crease, and I found the color stuck a little bit and just required a little bit more blending out. But that's not something I normally do. Normally I'm grabbing a much fluffier brush for my crease, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. The shimmer shadows do actually have a bit of range in terms of smoothness and chunkiness. So the ones that are kind of chunky would be Blurred Lines and Not Playing. I feel like there's just a little bit more flex of shimmer in those 2 eyeshadows that you have to layer it a little bit and kind of like crush the pigment onto your eyelid in order to get a smoother color. The other shimmers don't behave that way. They are Lucid, On One, Eclipse, and So Meta up here. They're much smoother. They don't apply in sort of that flaky, little bit chunky texture. They are just smooth to apply and easy to play with. I'm particularly impressed with the color combinations in here because there's a lot of matte shadows in colors that I want in mattes. Namely, this deep purple called Keep Cool here. I use that constantly on my outer corner. I have that in there today, just because I feel like purple is like natively quite a deep shade. And so it's so easy to put it on the outer corner and mix it with practically any other lid color. I also like Bring It down here because it's a deeper teal. It's not quite as deep of a teal as I would normally put in the outer corner, but I can deepen it up with Prism down here, which looks pretty black in the pan, but it does come off as a deeper charcoal. I did use Prism a lot to deepen up outer corner colors just because I really like a deep outer corner, and it worked really well layered on top of Keep Cool and Bring It, and I'm not sure if I added it to any of the other ones, but it did work really well with those 2. Things to note about certain shadows, Lucid down here, that looks like your typical kind of like blue brown pigment, you know, the one MAC kind of made famous years ago. Except it's not actually blue brown. It comes off more as like a blue purple, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it was just gonna look like that MAC shadow I've seen for years and years and years. But when I put it on the lid, I realized when I put Keep Cool beside it that it was pulling out so many purple tones in the shadow that it actually made for quite a unique eyeshadow. It's, don't get me wrong, it is very similar to blue brown pigment or anything like that, but it's not quite there. It does have more purple in the base. Blurred Lines is another one that's a little bit different. It looks very white and shimmery in the viewfinder, but it's actually a very pale white gold. I've seen a lot of brands putting out that kind of pale white gold lately, and I don't know if maybe it's a trend coming back into style, but I used to use that kind of shade years and years ago, and I forgot how much I liked it. It's a gorgeous color, and it's one of the easier ones to put on the inner corner of your eye to really brighten it up. While I feel like this whole palette is chosen quite well in terms of shadows, I feel like there's 2 that are just a little bit too similar for my liking, and they would be Woke and Wishlist. And it's funny because looking at it, they don't look that similar, and you would not expect them to look nearly identical on the eye, but in practice, I feel like they really came across a little bit too similarly on the eye, so I wish that there had been a little bit more of a change in depth of the colors. Maybe this one could be a little bit brighter and this one could be a little bit paler. It is a small little negative thing to point out about this palette, and I do really like the colors, but on the eyes they do come across very similarly. Okay, now that I've talked about the shadows, let's take a look at the 5 eye looks that I created using this palette. The first look uses Woke through the crease, and then I put Wish List right below the crease. This is when I noticed that those two colors are very similar because I don't feel like adding that color changed what Woke looked like. I feel like it kind of just looked same. I applied So Meta on the lid, and then I put Wish List on the middle of the lid because I needed a transition color between Manifest It, which is on the outer corner. I felt like Manifest It was a little bit too pink, so I added Keep Cool, which is that deep purple color, to the outer corner to sort of deepen it up. And at this point, it turned into a beautiful sunset eye, and I really like it. I also put Wiggles on the brow bone. Look number 2 has Woke through the crease again. You'll notice that a lot. I do that practically every single time that I use this palette. I then put Manifest It through the crease and On One on the lid. On One is incredible. It's funny because I feel like this kind of color often struggles when it has too much black in the base, because then the black shows up more than the actual color. That wasn't a problem with this one. It came across beautifully. I put Keep Cool on the outer corner and then used a little bit of Prism on the outer corner as well to deepen it up. I put Eclipse on the inner corner of the eye and then Wiggles on the brow bone. For look number 3, I applied Woke through the crease, and then I took Blurred Lines and put that on the lid and inner corner of the eye. I used Bring It on the outer corner and then Prism to deepen up the very outer corner. And again, I have Wiggles on the brow bone. For look number 4, I've got Woke through the crease again, and then I have Lucid on the lid, and this is when I discovered it's a lot more purple than I gave it credit for initially. I then took Keep Cool and put that on the outer corner of the eye, and it's almost unreal to me how pink Keep Cool came across in this look. I didn't use any of the pink Manifest It in this look, and yet it looks quite pink overall, and yet I just used a strict purple. I also used Prism on the outer corner to deepen it up, and then I put Not Playing on the inner corner, but then I covered it up with Lucid because I didn't like how it looked. And that combination together actually worked out quite well just for an inner corner highlight. I also put Keep Cool on the lower lash line and then buffed it out with Woke. And of course, I've got Wiggles on the brow bone again. For today's look, I took Woke yet again, but I mixed it with Manifest It to create my crease color. I wasn't loving how much pink was getting added by Manifest It, so I ended up layering Woke a little bit more on top. I did use a denser brush here, which is when I noticed that it sticks a little bit if I use such a dense brush. So I moved on to Wiggles, which is my brow bone highlight shade at that point. It's not something I normally do with makeup, but I wanted to blend out that area and make sure that this makeup look was going to work before I kept going. So Wiggles, sure enough, even that smooth blend up to my brow bone. I then moved on to my lid color and applied Not Playing all over my lid. It's a beautiful shade, but it does require a little bit of layering just because it's a little bit flaky. I took Keep Cool and put that on the outer corner of my eye and blended that through my crease. At this point, I then moved on to the lower lash line and I took On One and pretty much smudged that along most of my lower lash line, but then I blended it out to the outer corner with Bring It, and I brought Bring It pretty high up. I wanted to sort of meld into the purple. The two colors side by side were really pretty, but I did want it to be a little bit deeper, so I took Prism, which is that matte charcoal shade, and layered that just in the outer corner between the two colors. For the inner corner of my eye, I used Eclipse, a beautiful shade that looks quite silver in the pan, but it's actually got a little bit of brown to the silver. It's quite pretty, and it really helped to highlight the inner corner of my eye and was easy to blend into the two shades, both on the top and bottom lids. I love how this look came together. I would normally, I think, opt to put the blue on the top lid and the purple on the bottom because I feel like the blue tends to pull the look down a little bit, but I actually like that today. I feel like it's a heavy lower lash line. I mean, the look in general is quite heavy, but it's a pretty look. I really like how this one came out. Okay, so ColourPop's Chasing Rainbow palettes. You've seen my 5 looks, my swatches, and you've heard my thoughts on the shadows, and pretty much I love it. I am really excited by this palette, and it makes me even more excited for ColourPop because I feel like I've been ignoring them for a really long time just because I didn't like the initial products that I tried by them. The formula on this is fantastic, especially given that it's so cheap. I mean, I feel like more often than not, we just think that cheap in price point means cheap in quality, but that's not the case with this one. The quality is excellent, and I'm really excited that I'm so excited about something by ColourPop. Although now it's kind of opened a black pit for me because now I want to pick up even more palettes by ColourPop. But you know what? That's a good thing. It's good to have inexpensive, colorful palettes, and that's exactly what ColourPop is offering us with the Chasing Rainbows palette. One last thing to mention with this palette, it is limited edition. It was part of their holiday collection, so I don't know how long it's going to be around for. It is still currently available on their website, so pick it up while you can if you're interested in the colors. Alright, that's going to be it for my review on the ColourPop Chasing Rainbows palette. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!